All right. So, hello everyone, and welcome to our virtual exploration of Buddhism. Glad you could dig out Zoom one more time, right? It's like from the bad old days, maybe. Or they might have been the good old days for you. I don't know. I mean, if you're kind of an introvert like me, it's like not ever having to leave the house. There's some good things about that. So last week we were talking about renunciation and then about the moral wrinkles, and we talked about abstaining from taking life, and we talked about what did we talk about? Right speech, right? And then we got into right action. We talked about not killing and all that good stuff. And so we're starting with stealing this evening. But are there any questions before we get started, or thoughts about anything that we're on at this point? We didn't get into the whole sticky wicket of, can you have a completely pacifist society, that has no military or whatever? How do you run a country in the modern world? There's all sorts of these issues around pacifism, but I don't know if this class is quite the right place to dig into it, but there are many subtleties. There is this idea of the world-turning monarch in Buddhism, this perfect Buddhist ruler who can make all this work. You might need somebody pretty perfect to make the world run the way Buddhism thinks it should. But anyway, well, barring any of that, stealing. So, are we for it or against it? Where are we? How are we feeling about stealing? I just love how poetic the Buddhist phrase is: "Do not take that which is not given to you." I mean, this is really way past don't snatch something, that seems to be loose and available, right? That seems to fall under the purview, right? If you just see something laying around, I think Buddhism would recommend that you assume somebody already owns that or considers it theirs, and so perhaps it's not free for the taking. And so it covers theft and robbery and fraud and deception. All of that is in "do not take what is not given to you." And of course, monks, this is very strict for monks in Theravadan countries where they follow the strict Vinaya. A monk can't eat food that was not handed to them by someone else. It's almost a matter of life and death, Someone's willing to contribute to the well-being of the monks. So anyway. So any thoughts about stealing? This is like one of the most cut and dried ones of the bunch, because of course in our culture, we already have a very strong concept of what is your property and what is someone else's property. And so the lines are pretty clear. If you have communal assets, this gets a lot more vague. But any thoughts out there? Well, hopefully, if you were considering a life of crime, this class will dissuade you from it. This is my hope. But if we're all good with stealing, then we'll move on. The next one, abstaining from sexual misconduct. So society is a little different now than it used to be back in the Buddha's day. And so a lot of the rules around sexual misconduct had to do with basically with what women were available to you who were trying to follow the Buddha's words. It's sort of a one-sided thing. And so, this is the way it is with traditional societies. And so most of the rules that were given around sexual misconduct were about what women were unavailable. And so women who were still under the protection of their families or who were married to someone else, and so it's pretty weird. Of course, nowadays, I mean, everybody in the Buddhist world interprets this in a much more equally and more broad sort of way. One of my favorites, and this actually came out of an LLM a while back, to summarize this kind of precept for the modern day. It said, "Be respectful of other people's boundaries," and I thought that was actually a pretty good modern interpretation. because we, you know, we do have boundaries in this modern world, that's what we consider this to mean. You know, that there's all sorts of things that count as bad behavior, but it has to do with what somebody is you know, going to permit you to do. And another thing that strikes me about this is now there's this modern sort of emphasis on consent, right? And whatever you may think of that, whether you think it's too much or not enough or whatever, I do think the general idea of consent is very Buddhist, because really that ties this precept, you know, abstaining from sexual misconduct, back to the one for stealing, right? It's like don't take anything that wasn't actually given to you, you know. And so one can become a subset of the other, I suppose, in some way. Of course, from the Buddhist perspective, nothing really belongs to you, right? Because everything you have now will be leaving you at some point for some reason. So nothing actually belongs to you. There's a great story from the Sufis. If you're around me for very long, you'll hear more Sufi stories. But the Sufi, you know, these are these Islamic mystics, is what a Sufi is, and they're always, you know, having these little interactions. So he's in the king's palace for whatever reason, you know, and the king, being a king, is very proud of it. He says, "Well, what do you think, you know, Sufi master? You know, isn't this a grand thing?" And he said, "Oh, you mean this?" And he calls it a caravanserai, which basically means like a hotel on a road, you know, where the camel caravans would stop, you know. So it's just a watering hole, basically, you know. Is that what you're asking me? What I think of this caravanserai? And the king is terribly offended, of course, you know. And he said, well, you know, this is the royal palace, you know. How could you offend, you know, your nation like this? And the Sufi says, well, who lived here before you did? And he said, well, my father, of course, the previous king, you know. And he says, well, who was here before that? And he says, well, it was his father, you know. Our families ruled this land for generations. And the Sufi says, so you mean this place where people are coming and going all the time, it's something other than a caravanserai, you know? It's just a place to stop and water your camels. Anyway, so I have to sprinkle a few of these stories in from time to time. But yes, so you know, what belongs to you is an interesting question to me when you get down to the real Buddhist take on it. So, and another thing I want to mention here with this one is that the Buddha talked about domestic life some, not a lot. But one of the more interesting sutras was where somehow the Buddha got talking about the 7 kinds of wives, right? The 7 kinds of wives that a man might marry. And I'll let you go find the sutra to read all the rest of them, because it's kind of wild. But one of them I thought I wanted to mention, because it's the one that's still very applicable to modern day. And the description of this kind of wife, and you know, this will work either way, is she is delighted to see him, like one reunited with a long lost friend. She's well raised, virtuous, and devoted. A man's wife of this sort is called a wife and a friend. And I just thought it's interesting because, you know, of course, most marriages, certainly among people that mattered, most marriages were arranged in the Buddhist day. And so love very often, you know, and friendship very often didn't figure into it. But at least there was this understanding that there was a kind of marriage that was a real partnership. You know, even in the Buddhist day, that was understood, you know. And of course, today that's considered to be the correct, not like those other 6, believe me. It's the correct sort of model for marriage. But anyway, so now, you know, it wasn't all completely backwards, but yeah, traditional societies, I wouldn't recommend them, frankly, you know. So any thoughts about stealing and sexual misconduct, or any other, you know, juicy topics we want to dig into here in the Buddhist class?
It's actually kind of interesting. The idea of stealing can actually tie back to the discussion on taking life, because aren't you stealing a life that belongs to someone else?
That's right. Is there really just one rule? That's right. Everything is taking something that doesn't belong to you, one way or the other.
One rule: if it's not yours, don't mess with it.
That's right. That's right. I mean, I guess, well, I was going to say, even though sobriety is not usually counted in right, we're doing right action, by the way. I don't know if I mentioned that. And so right action, don't hurt people, don't steal things, avoid sexual misconduct. But one of the five precepts, that you're supposed to follow, your little rules for living, is to avoid alcohol or intoxicating substances. But that's usually not included in this. But I did want to mention, just so you know, that that what I've lost it. There's 6 drawbacks of drinking in the Theravada scriptures. They cover a lot of ground. So there's 6 drawbacks of drinking that I thought you should know, even though it's not traditionally part of this discussion. One is immediate loss of wealth. I really like that one. That's so often true when alcohol is involved. The second one, promotion of quarrels. So arguments, also a common feature in alcoholic consumption. The third one, susceptibility to illness. I thought that was pretty forward thinking. We certainly know a lot more about drinking, or so we think, than people back in the day. The next one, I guess this might be number 4, disrepute. So it certainly can lead to that. And the next one is indecent exposure. So you have been warned. This is a possibility with drinking. And the last one is weakened wisdom. So the six drawbacks of drinking. I want to be a full service thing here. I thought we should cover that. So now you know. One other thing I wanted to say about right action and ethics in general is we talked a little bit about last week about the Buddha's advice to his son Rahula, Rahula, who was ordained eventually. And so there's this whole little chapter on basic morals. That's the Buddha's advice to Rahula. And we talked about last week about the extreme emphasis on how important honesty is, right? But there's more to it than that. He also goes through this whole thing about how do you think about right action? And so in that section, the Buddha says, what do you think, Rahula? What is a mirror for? And he says, for reflection, sir. And the Buddha says, in the same way, Rahula, bodily actions, verbal actions, and mental actions are to be done with repeated reflection. And I'm going to read this whole thing to you just so you get the flavor of it and you see kind of how he's treating this. The Buddha says, whenever you want to act, you should reflect on it. The action I want to do, would it lead to self-affliction, to the affliction of others, or to both? Would it be an unskillful action with painful consequences and painful results? If, on reflection, you know that it would lead to self-affliction, to the affliction of others, or to both, it would be an unskillful action with painful consequences, painful results, then any action of that sort is absolutely unfit for you to do. But if on reflection you know that it would not cause affliction, it would be a skillful action with pleasant consequences, pleasant results, then any action of that sort is fit for you to do. And so he says, so that's before you act, right? He's saying you should consider all this before you take any action, bodily action in this case. But then he says all the same things for a verbal action and a mental action. So consider what you're going to do before you do it. And then he goes on, while you're doing a bodily action, you should reflect on it. This bodily action I am doing. Same stuff. Is it leading to self-affliction, the affliction of others, or both? Is it an unskillful action with painful consequences, painful results? If on reflection, you know that it is leading to self-affliction and all of that, you should give it up. And then after you've done anything, after you've taken an action, having done a bodily action, you should reflect on it. This bodily action that I have done, did it lead to self-affliction, affliction of others, or both? Unskillful with painful consequences, painful results. If you know that it led to self-affliction, the affliction of others, or both, etc., then you should confess it, reveal it, lay it open to the teacher or to a knowledgeable companion in the holy life. Of course, Rahula is a monk, but having confessed it, you should exercise restraint in the future. But if on reflection you know that it didn't lead to affliction, etc., then you should stay mentally refreshed and joyful, training day and night in skillful mental qualities. So So before you do it, while you're doing it, after you're doing it, bodily actions, verbal actions, mental actions. And this is, that's why these sutras are so repetitive. That makes them easy to memorize, right? But reading them can be a chore. But I think I sent a link to this in the email if you want to investigate it further. So yeah, you have to think a lot when you act as a Buddhist, but your actions, words, and thoughts before, during, and after. But that's what mindfulness is for, right? Which we will soon be talking about. I promise, really, someday. Any thoughts?
I have a question.
Yes.
Well, it seems really hard to walk around with 300 specific rules in your head.
Oh, for the monastics, you mean?
Yeah, or just for us in general that, as opposed to say developing a conscious relationship to the world where you wouldn't be needing to remind yourself, not to
Right.
snatch someone's food off their plate or whatever. And
Right. That's
and
right.
so, I mean, I think that it's in a modern version of this, it's all about paying attention to what you do, and that
Absolutely.
it'll be obvious to you, kind of.
Right. Well, right. And Theravada Buddhism, it's very well known for being absurdly sort of what's the word, prescriptive. It's like it's not going to leave anything to chance. It's going to tell you, exactly what all the 27 different things are that you should be doing. And right, but you're right. I mean, eventually you shouldn't have to think about this all the time. Eventually it just becomes second nature, right? The rules are just the
Yeah.
training wheels
Yeah.
down. And eventually you realize that what morality really is, right, is whenever the self is involved in your thinking, you are likely to cross over the line into something that's unkind and against the rules and all that good stuff. But if you're always thinking of the well-being of everyone, then
Mhm.
you're naturally moral. There's not anything to think about, right?
Yeah.
When you act for the benefit of all beings, as we love to say in Buddhism. So yeah, these rules are absurd, but it's just trying to put into words what will eventually be natural. But so many people like to weasel their way out of the right thing, right? And
Yeah,
so to
rationalize.
me, there's a purpose to putting it so specifically. It's like, no, you can't generalize and skirt around it. You really have to consider every aspect of every action. If you are prone in any area where you are prone to messing up, right? I mean, I guess that's really what it's for.
Well, I also like that we always mess up. Everybody always
No
messes up,
doubt. Right.
right? And so what's really delicious about what you're describing is that there's what's something to do. When you mess up, you confess, you recognize it, you pay attention, you see it, you resolve not to do it again, right?
Right.
It's
Right.
it's, it's like there's support for all the millions of times that you don't get it right, which is really
Right.
helpful.
Well, and I think about too the difference between what's intended and what's received.
Hmm.
Like we may say something without any intention to harm, but the other person receiving it might see it differently.
Hmm.
Right. You're right. So that's a good, and so this all of the bit with Rahula, did it lead to painful consequences or to the affliction of others? This is something that often people don't consider that important. It's like, well, by the rule, I did the right thing, right? So I'm right. Right. But if the other person is damaged, if the other person is now afflicted, that is an indication that you did, no matter how virtuous you think you have something to learn because you caused someone affliction. As so often gets said around my house, you know you say that's not how you meant it, but that's how I heard it.
Right.
This is the ultimate rule. How did the other person hear it? like all that with right speech, right?
Yeah.
To say it in such a way that you're actually heard correctly, the way you meant it. So absolutely, absolutely. How did the other person take it? Yeah, and I never noticed really before the other day when I was looking at this that confession bit was in there. You know, because really by the time you read through the sutra and you get to this part, your eyes are glazing over. You know, but he goes off the track and he says, you should tell somebody. Because I mean, the Catholic said it, but the Buddhists would agree, confession is good for the soul.
Yeah.
There's this very formal process where if a monk screws up, they go before the whole, you know, monastery at a meeting. They have regular meetings, you know, and you confess, you know, and you know, if there's a punishment that needs to be meted out, you know, the senior monks will confer or whatever. But yeah, any little infraction, you confess it. That's the rule at the monastery. That's the way it should be handled. So. All right.
There's
Yes.
so let's step outside of the gates of the monastery,
Oh.
and we are trying to mind our business. We're trying to mind our manners, and it's obviously a denser situation. Everything's connected. It's actually quite difficult to walk through this modern life and not leave a negative trail, whether it's the excess packaging that your food comes in that is not recyclable and blinds narwhal up in, you know, the Arctic, you know, or a straw that ends up in a turtle. So you have these things where you do afflict, you do cause harm,
Right.
and then there's the vagaries of like you and the ambiguity of just interacting with people. You may inadvertently hurt somebody without even knowing it.
Right.
All those things. And so the prescriptive 8 things, 9 things become, so you probably talked about this in last week's class. I wasn't here, but in terms of, and then, you know, things like confession. I think I was starting out to saying, do you think confession is a psychological clearing of your own sense of inappropriate guilt or shame? Or, I mean, I'm trying to think about fitting confession in this case
Right.
of all our kind of mess ups, intentional or not, where we've caused harm. How do we place that in our psyche, you know?
Confession, you're saying?
Oh, well, that's one thing, but I'm just thinking you just talked about, you know, everything that we do, we have to look at it in a mindful way about, well, was this good? Does this lead to positive things or negative things and so forth? But negative things, especially in dealing with others, you know, it's very messy out there, and
Yes. That's why the Buddha advises against being a human too often, right? We're supposed to be figuring out how to move beyond this stage because it's a mess, you know, from the bigger metaphysical picture. But I mean, one thing that strikes me,
but did you frame? Did I miss the framing of like, okay, but how for us non monks and nuns,
right?
How do we work with this list of things?
Right.
If you could just give I know that you're so complete in what you do, Doug. I can't help but
well, I don't know if I covered the angle you're talking about. I mean, there's this general idea of what does morality mean in the path, right? And we've touched on that a little bit. That just being born on this earth means you are going to screw up, right? You are causing problems for other people just by breathing, you know. And so you cannot live a blameless life as a human being in that sense, you know, because you're taking up room, you know, you're doing stuff that other people have a different idea about it. And so you're always, you know, generating some mixed karma, as I mentioned last time, that most people are in the mixed karma category of being, you know, and so some things are good, some things are bad, some things are gonna, you know, end up with good karma for you and bad karma and all that, and so you, and so that can't, living an earthly life, that can't be helped. I mean, one thing that strikes me about confession, though, is that because in this case, the scheme was you didn't confess to like the abbot. No, you stood in front of the group. And so your difficulties and foibles and failings become a group concern. And everybody's here and everybody's right, you know, and so it doesn't matter who you are, you will confess to everybody. And so the Sangha, you know, the community of spiritual friends, you know, they're all trying to carry each other here, you know, because they're all hearing each other's confessions. And, you know, some things were a secret until they were confessed, and other things everybody saw it right when it happened. And so they're just waiting for you to stand up and talk about it, you know. But to me, that's a very different flavor than carrying your ethical burdens all by yourself, you know. To have a community that says, yes, everybody screws up. Everybody makes people mad or breaks the rules or does something thoughtless. And we're going to talk about all of it. And we understand that, you know, no one is exempt, you know, from the human condition. So that's what struck me about it, I guess.
So is the purpose of confession to simply normalize our failings?
Well, I mean, to me, there's a lot to unpack there, because for one thing, once you share a secret, right, it's not nearly such a problem. Anyone who's been in therapy will know what it's like to finally say the thing you've never told anyone. You know, this is a great relief. You know, because then it is normalized in the sense of I don't have to. It's not a special burden for me anymore. Everybody now knows it, and so it becomes no big deal. It just becomes something that I need to be aware of in the future. And that's the other thing is, if you know that you are going to confess things that might cause you to approach certain situations with a very different frame of mind, you know. So
I think it would also present an opportunity if you say, you know, well, I've done this thing and I don't know how to not do it. That you're not on your own, that the group as a whole can discuss how to, you know, what a solution might be or support one another through avoiding certain behaviors.
that's right.
Good point.
And Ajahn Sumedho tells this great story that I think relates enough that I'll tell it. So there was a monk when he found Ajahn Chah, his master, and you know, and was at his monastery. He was so happy because he thought Ajahn Chah just hung the moon, you know. And I mean, Ajahn Chah was a very great teacher. He was beloved sort of by the whole country by the time of his death. But, you know, he didn't, you know, he just thought everyone should be ecstatic to be at Ajahn Chah's monastery and they should all be good monks. Well, there was this monk who was just terrible. You know, he would sneak off and get drunk or whatever. He was always arguing with I don't remember what all his sins were, but Ajahn Sumedho had a list of them. You know, and so finally one day he couldn't take it anymore. You know, he stood up and confronted the monk with all of these things that he thought that he had been doing wrong. You know, and this is in Thailand. In Thai society, when you do that to someone, there's no coming back from it. You know, and so in short order, that monk had packed up his things and left. You know, and then Ajahn Chah calls Sumedho. He wasn't an Ajahn at that point, I don't think. He calls him in for a little chat. And he says, what you did was terrible. That monk has been to every monastery across northern Thailand, and he's been kicked out of every one of them. We were his last chance. And you drove him out, you know. And so then Sumedho understood, you know, how this is supposed to work. You know, we are not a museum of perfect people. We are a hospital, right? And so you expect people to be, you expect a certain number of monks are just going to struggle, and that's part of being a monastic community, is you are going to help them as long as they can possibly be helped until there's just no hope at all, or they leave on their own without being dressed down by a junior monk. He was, Samedo says, I'm an American, I was just so full of myself, it's like, I know what's right and wrong, but that's not the right way to look at it, in this situation. So anyway.
I think it's also relevant that, a Buddhist perspective is different from our Western perspective, which is, we have sin and original sin and all that kind of stuff, which is all supposed to be shameful.
Right.
But the fact is, the first noble truth is suffering. And like you said, Doug, if you're born as a human being, there's going to be mistakes. There's going to be, you can't avoid it. And so in that context, when you start looking at your mistakes in front of people and discussing them with people, they learn from them, you learn from them. And there's this, general understanding that, yeah, mistakes happen, but we can do something about it. We can do something with that information, and it can help us grow. So it seems to me very, very healthy.
Right. The other thing that strikes me when you mention the word sin is that to Buddhism, there wasn't an original sin. What was original is ignorance. And ignorance is very different from sin. Because ignorance is just, you didn't know. No one's ever told you how to behave. No one's ever told you what the world is like and what's right and wrong and true and false and what you should, go after and what you should avoid. You don't know any of that. You're an idiot, and ignorance can be solved. Somebody who's tainted with sin, that doesn't sound nearly as solvable, but we can overcome our ignorance no matter how profound.
Yeah.
So our next little tidbit here on the path of our next wrinkle, actually. So that's ethics, and next is right livelihood. And this is always kind of an interesting one. I've always loved that it's in the list because it seems like an oversight in a lot of moral systems. You should really look at what people actually do all day. But it's mostly lists, and the lists were in my outline. And this is really all cribbed from Bhikkhu Bodhi's book, which is good, even though it's hard to read. Right livelihood. There are certain ways of living that you should go by. It needs to be legal. That's helpful. In your society, you should do something that's not illegal. It should be peaceful. So, jobs that involve violence, that's not good. It should be honest. You should be honest and not harmful. So those are the general rules: legal, peaceful, honest, and harmless, nonviolence. And then there's a list of the specific things you should avoid. And this is a tough one because we live in a capitalist society, and when people need a job, they just need to get a job, and they can't be, their standards can't be too high, So specific things to avoid is weapons, don't deal in living beings, and don't deal in meat. So living beings or dead beings, as the case may be. Those are both things. Obviously, that gets back to the whole vegetarian society issue, and sort of in the Buddhist day, most people were not Buddhists, and so a lot of these kind of weird societal issues didn't come up, right? But it's kind of like the Shaker community back in the day. They didn't believe in having children, right? Well, if everyone's a Shaker, then soon there will be no more Shakers, right? So if everyone has to avoid dealing in living beings and meat, then you will have a vegetarian society in short order. But anyway, that's on the list: living beings and meat. Poisons is next. Don't deal in poisons. Makes sense. They're used to kill things. And intoxicants, and that's one of the precepts. So don't sell people intoxicants if you're a Buddhist. And all that's very interesting because there's lots of Buddhists in the military. a lot of people's jobs, violate this rule. And so as a Buddhist, you just have to decide what does that mean? I mean, in one sense, being a soldier, you can think of it as promoting peace. One hopes, that you are able to think of your job as promoting peace, even if it's your job to carry a gun. And of course, it's interesting, and until whatever the last few decades, sort of between the Korean War and I don't know, Gulf War, I guess, being a soldier was a pretty peaceful job, but it's not anymore, for American soldiers. So, or it hasn't been off and on for quite a while. So yeah, but that's the rule, and so you have to decide what that means for your life. And then there's another list of just specific methods, which is kind of like just the attributes. So making your living by deceit, not good. Treachery, which is sort of like disloyalty. So if you make your money by selling secrets, I guess, to another country, I don't know. The next one's interesting, soothsaying. So fortune telling. The Buddha and that community looked down on it quite a bit. But what's interesting is, and this is true in Buddhism, is no matter what you're talking about, there's a Buddhist group somewhere at some point in history that did that thing, whatever it may be. And in Tibet, there's a part of Buddhism that is involved with divination, and so it's part of the religion and part of the culture. But in the Buddha's day, in the Theravada canon, or in the Pali Canon, the Theravada, soothsaying was considered a bad thing. And the reason he had to make that rule in the first place is because that's one of the things that monks would do. Monks would go out and people wanted the monks to like bless them and to like, tell them what the future held. This was considered a thing that holy people should be able to do. And so the Buddha was often trying to tamp down these little fortune telling operations that would be going on with his followers. So no divination. Next one is trickery. So similar to deceit, but this is like counterfeit goods or weights and measures and all that sort of stuff. And then the last one is usury. So charging excessive interest. So quite a number of things in Right Livelihood. Do we have any thoughts?
I think that rules out most politicians.
Right. Well, certainly the idea that you have to bend the truth pretty hard to get elected to anything above dog catcher is certainly a common way of looking at politics. I'm afraid you're right. So, but yeah, and so that's the thing is there's so many things that get covered with this that it's not, I used to work out at the air base. I used to write lesson plans for people flying C-130s to, carry stuff into war zones and all that jazz. And so I have fallen short of this list as well, at least in the past. So,
well, I'm wondering, is it all a matter of perspective? Because like you said, with the military, you can view it as keeping peace. I mean, you could also look at working in a slaughterhouse as providing sustenance.
right. Yeah. I mean, this is one of the ones that it's harder to weasel your way around. It's like I think it's good to think about right livelihood, but certainly in a society like ours, and of course, in the traditional society, you had to do what your father did, right? And so, if you were a man, and so there wasn't any question about what. You didn't really have a choice in a lot of cases as to what your livelihood was going to be. So this has probably always been kind of a problematic list.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Well,
It may serve more to make you aware of the echoes that your livelihood has in the world more than drive you away from or towards certain professions.
right.
It served more just as awareness.
Absolutely. I mean, it's one of those things where, for I'm a programmer, and my wife was a preschool teacher, and so my standard line was, yes, she's the one who's actually making the world a better place. I generally was not. Hopefully it was just neutral, you know. It's what my wish is, that what I did was just neutral. But yeah, so how your work affects the world is a very interesting meditation. That's very true. So, one more thing I wanted to mention in talking about a good society. The Buddha was once asked, so we want to go attack these people. Why people would ask the Buddha these questions, I don't know. So yeah, we want to go and attack these guys, and do you think we'll win? This was their question, and the Buddha had a series of questions for them. He said, so they were going to go attack the Vajis. I'm not sure how you pronounce it, you know. And so the Buddha asked a series of questions. He said, so these Vajis that you want to go out and eliminate, in their society, do they have frequent gatherings, and are their meetings well attended? Right. So do they work together as a community? Do they see themselves as a community and get together often? His next question: do they assemble and disperse peacefully and attend to their affairs in concord? So are they an orderly society where they're able to work together and solve problems and do their thing? Right. The third question: do they neither enact new decrees nor abolish existing ones, but go in accordance with their ancient constitutions? I mean, this is a tougher one for us because the modern world moves so quickly. We can't go by an ancient constitution. But to me, it's kind of like, are laws made thoughtfully and with a view towards the long term, you know, or is everything just, you know, seat of the pants, you know? So I thought that was good. The next one: do the Vajis show respect, honor, esteem, and veneration towards their elders? So, and all of these, as you might imagine, this is what the Buddha thinks of as a strong society, right? Do they work together in an orderly fashion and, you know, have a very stable and consistent sort of society? Do they venerate their elders? The next one is a little tough for us, you know, different world. Do they refrain from abducting unmarried women to be wives? You know, unfortunately, apparently this was the way it was done in a lot of places. But I mean, for us, we could translate that as maybe, you know, do they have respect for women? For sure, and respect for families, because that's really what that was about. And that sort of leads to just respect for the powerless, right? You know, how are people with no power in the society treated? The next one: do they respect, honor, and esteem their shrine? So do they have something holy? Does a society can have some sense of the sacred? And the last one is: do the Vajis protect and guard the arahats? So, I mean, these are enlightened beings. For us, maybe we could say good and wise people, so that those who have not come to the realm yet might do so, and those who have already come might live there in peace. So is this the kind of society that attracts and retains wise, good people? And that was his list, you know, and the answer for this one was, you know, they are kind of like that, you know. And the Buddha said, well, you cannot defeat these people. You know, their society is too strong. They are not going to crumble. So I think they didn't attack in that case. But there's some other cases about wars where they ignored the Buddha and went on the rampage. But anyway, so I didn't know if I talked about that one or not. But
so I guess, like, at what point would they attack in a society? Because that just seems kind of counter Buddhist.
Oh, right. So the people who were asking the Buddha were not his followers. These were the Sakyan clan that the Buddha came from. So this was his sort of it's not an ethnic group really. It's just a little city state, you know, like his father, the king, right? And so, you know, once he had returned and had some interaction with the Sakyans, they would occasionally come and interact with him. And so this was a question from his fellow, because he was from the warrior caste, the Buddha was. And so this was a question from his fellow warriors, you know, who said, so you're wise, can we beat these guys? So it was a political question from his community, I guess, his original community. But good point. I didn't really make that clear. Yes, sounds like monasteries are attacking each other. You know,
it was almost a soothsaying question, almost.
That's right, right. The Buddha was very rational in his answer. So, so right, the Buddha is all about cause and effect, right? That's okay. It's okay to predict the future if you're working from the facts. So.
Well, not to be too discursive here, but I was wondering if it was a rigged answer because no matter what would come up would be like, no, I don't think that you should attack them. I mean, it's like,
right.
Because, come on.
Right. Well, that's right. And of course, the Buddha, I don't think in the sutra he actually said if they should attack him or not. What he did was provide questions for them to consider in their decision, So this
And
is
also, I
this
think
is what
it
makes a
provides,
society hard to beat. Right.
yeah, and it provided a list of what a strong, community or society is too. So.
Right. But I thought it was interesting because, I mean, so much of Buddhism, especially Theravada Buddhism, is about the individual. But the Buddha did go off on these more social topics from time to time. So, very good, very good. Well, we have 15 minutes left, and so I don't know if we should start talking about right effort or if we have more ethical conundrums that we would like to unpack. Go back and
Maybe
look
a
over things.
little bit of thinking about again, maybe I'm just kind of trying to muddy up the waters a little bit. And that is, I think, say, the later development of Mahayana, there's a value of all those things being, honest and not harming and so forth, and being an awake person, mindful. You have an influence by virtue of that of the people around you. So being a secretary at a meat processing plant is not necessarily aiding the killing of animals, but you're actually spreading sanity by your presence and the way you react to the community directly around you. Same way if you're in the military, ostensibly that's a war fighty thing and whatnot. But if you are a medic or you're a this or that, and you're sane and peaceful, you are actually contributing that to that culture, which would, reduce the amount of negativity that culture would have, in theory.
Absolutely.
I subscribe to that, but, it's saying.
No, right, because a group consensus is a product of all the individuals involved, right? And so you can always advocate for more humane treatment of animals or whatever it may be, no matter who you are. Just chatting in the hallway, right? You have an influence one way or the other. And yeah, it's interesting. When I was looking at articles about Thich Nhat Hanh, because I did talk about him last week, there was an interview with a policewoman who was a member of I don't know if she's actually a member of the Order of Inner Being or whatever, but she's very involved with the Plum Village tradition. And when she first got involved with him, she said, well, here's the problem. I'm a cop, it's like, I'm not sure I should even be here, and what they said was, you don't understand. If anybody's going to carry a gun, we want them to be you. We want somebody who is looking for wisdom and who, is concerned about, the ethics and the bigger picture of what they're doing and who wants to study the teachings. You are exactly who needs to be carrying a gun. So, you can always look at it from the other side. Do you want a soldier walking into a village who's just there to commit a legal crime, whatever, or someone who is considering what orders they've been given and how to carry them out in a humane way, whatever that may be? Who would you want walking into your village, right? So there's always two sides. That is right. So, well, I will say this, because I was going to say this at some point, about the book. So you may be wondering why I just gave you an outline and am pointing you at Bhikkhu Bodhi's book for, for the Eightfold Path and all of that. And there's a chapter in our book that was supposed to be about the Eightfold Path. It's that book. It's that chapter 8 that by Goenka, and I had you read the first part of it, just about morals or whatever. But as we're going through the Eightfold Path, you may be wondering, well, why isn't this in the book? And this will tell you something about the state of Buddhism and what a confusing place it is, because there's a lot of major traditions in the world of Buddhism and a lot of minor traditions, and so I'm sure when the people who were putting this book together, they said, well, somebody needs to write something about the Eightfold Path. Well, here's a very famous and well-respected Buddhist, Goenka. We'll have him write the chapter, and his chapter is good. I'm going to talk about that. Well, first, I guess I'll just say, Goenka teaches a particular style of meditation that he calls Vipassana. And there's these 10-day Vipassana retreats that are held all over the world. And Goenka's meditation methods are really good. This is good Buddhism, that he teaches. The interesting thing about Goenka, though, is that he thinks that once you understand his meditation method, and you act as more in a moral way, right? That's the first part of his chapter, the moral teachings, that's really all you need, and the rest of us in the sort of in the Buddhist world and in the Theravada world, we're like, we think there's a little more to it than that, So what happened was, so he wrote this chapter, chapter 8, and his headings are good, because he has a heading about right effort, and right awareness and all of that kind of stuff, but he doesn't actually talk about any of the traditional topics that go under those headings. He talks about his meditation method through the whole chapter. And so I'm actually going to assign his chapter when we talk about meditation, but it's not such a great chapter on the Eightfold Path. It is a very good chapter on his style of meditation, which is quite good, I will say. But it's just one of those funny things, He's a great teacher. He has these 10-day retreats all over the world. I've heard people, I haven't been to one myself, but I've looked through the material they teach, and what they do is they will play you videos of Goenka giving his instructions, so that all of them are the same. You get Goenka's meditation method, and they're quite good. But yeah, that's what happened to the Eightfold Path chapter, and that's why we're sort of working around it. But now in case you were wondering, and that it's one of those things where every teacher has their own style of teaching, right? And that's one of the things about a living tradition like Buddhism, is if somebody's just reading it to you out of a book, you should find a different teacher, because that's not really, nobody thinks that's how Buddhism works. When Ajahn Chah asked Sumedho to give his first, little trial talk there at the monastery before, Ajahn Chah had to decide if Sumedho would become an Ajahn, would become a teacher. And so, being an American college-educated person, he got up and gave this, this whole essay, sort of with footnotes, about some topic of Buddhism. And he sat down, he was proud of himself. He did a lot of research, and he delivered it, and he sat down, and Ajahn Chah looks at him and says, "Don't ever do that again." So yes, this is not book learning. It's from people's experience. The teachers that you find, a lot of teachers that make a big impact, usually it's because they're teaching from their experience, but that means that it's all different, right? This is like when the sunshine comes through the stained glass window, right, of the teacher's, soul. You're not supposed to say soul as a Buddhist, but I really like the word soul. That it's going to reflect sort of their being. It's going to be interpreted through their worldview, and if they're very spiritual, if they are spiritually advanced, it's going to be very clear, but there's still a little tint to it. And so every teacher is different, and even even Sumedho, whom I really respect. I mean, Sumedho pretty much made me a Buddhist. I just listened to his talks over and over and over. as I said once, you know, it goes in your ears and it comes out the mouth. But even there are things about his teachings that I don't really quite agree with, just a few. But that's going to be true of everybody, you know. And so you when you find a good teacher, if they have some little foible or whatever, my advice would be overlook that. You know, take what's really feeding you, you know, because every teacher is a little different. They all have their own eccentricities about how they do Buddhism, and that includes Goenka. You know, great Vipassana course. He's a little too proud of it, perhaps. Anyway, so that's my spiel.
I want to add something about him, though, because just to
Yes,
his influence in the world has been incredible. And I mean,
right.
like the big thing in the Goenka world is prisoners. And we showed at EBS on our movie night one time this program in, I think it was Alabama, where his people went in and I mean, they were trained by him and stuff, and they went in
Right.
a program that they do, and it changes lives really dramatically. But it is
Absolutely.
not Buddhism. You're right. It is not Buddhism. There's no, it's almost like what you could call, you know, a secular expression of Buddhism because it's just the practice.
Right. But
So, I
it's a big
mean,
chunk of Buddhism, though.
well, it's,
You
but I
know,
mean, the thing is that
it's not all of it.
they do these programs with people. They don't teach them Buddhism. They teach them to
Right.
watch their minds. And
That's
Doug,
right.
you're such an academic, scholarly fellow that I can see why that doesn't mix. But I think that's what this book is good for because, as you say, we don't know. I don't know what is going to resonate for
Right.
everybody that's here in the class or anybody that's around. And so we wanted to expose everybody to all these different voices and traditions and stuff.
Right. And I don't mean to bash the book. I mean, I said from the beginning there were things about this book I liked and then others not so much, you know, and that
Yeah.
could be one of them.
And that's completely legitimate. In fact, that's a really good example for the rest of us. It's like you don't have to swallow anything that doesn't
Right.
taste right. You know, you can pick and choose that you're supposed to pick and choose. But and so, you know, I know there are many things in this book I just I don't know why they put them there. You know, they put
Right.
it there.
Right.
But it happened to be a good
No, it is a good.
collection.
It has two good chapters on meditation. 8 is the one that's supposed to be meditation. It's very good. We'll be talking
Yeah.
about that. And then Goenka's chapter 10, also very good about meditation.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's certainly useful Buddhism. We're all
So,
good.
but what you've done in putting together your own expression of all of this stuff is just incredible because I think I'm speaking for all of us that you have distilled through your own experience all these things that would be just hard to swallow, hard to even hear about, you know, all these lists and everything.
Right.
You've made them very human, Doug, and it's really helpful.
Well, thank you very much.
So, yeah.
I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, you know, it's obviously something I love to talk about. So
Yeah.
I think that much
Your heart is obviously in it. That's right.
So I want it to say it in such a way that hopefully people can get through all of the terrible, repetitive Pali nonsense and hear the teachings. You know, if you were a native, you know, of that land and sort of without the cultural accretions or whatever, what's he really saying? So yeah, it's all good.
Right. That's very good.
Well,
So for next week, what are we doing?
yeah, so next week, so now we stopped on a break here. So we finished the 3 ethical teachings, right speech, right action, right livelihood. And so next week will be right effort, which contains many lists and a lot of psychology too. So it ought to be interesting.
Fun.
Anyway, thank you everyone. Any
Thank you, Doug.
final words before we sign off on our remote session? I appreciate everybody who made it on, you know, got on Zoom one more time. I know nobody really likes Zoom, or most people. I've heard a lot of really, really unhappy people talking about having to be on Zoom from, you know, obviously back in the day. So thank you, everyone.
Well,
Take
thank
care.
you, Doug.
Yeah,
Have a good week.
Doug.
Till we meet again. Next week at EBS, right? This is kind of
Yeah,
a Jewish
definitely.
Friday, you know. Next week
Yeah.
at EBS. Thanks so much, everybody.
Thank
Okay.
you.
All
See you,
right,
everyone.
bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye, folks.
Bye.